if a war with Russia and the United States starts, it's not going to start with a nuclear bomb hitting New York. It's going to start with major dams opening and flooding downriver communities and killing thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans. It's going to start with a half a dozen nuclear power plants around America or more melting down. It's going to start with entire states browning out as their power grids are shut down. It's going to start with attacks on our financial system where all our banks are shut down. No power, no communications, no water. With those things happening, American cities would become unlivable within a week. This is scary stuff, I don't mean to scare you. Well, maybe I do. We need to know about this, right? I mean, we can't just have our heads in the sand. The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, presumably between drinks, has ordered the Pentagon, the American cybersecurity operation, to stop trying to block Putin's attempts to infiltrate our computer systems, our social media, and our military, frankly. Or at least that's my understanding of how this report works out. This was what Chuck Schumer said last week when this order came down. This news is a couple days old, but I wasn't here, so. Senator Chuck Schumer, quote, "Donald Trump is so desperate to earn the affection of a thug like Vladimir Putin, he appears to be giving him a free pass as Russia continues to launch cyber operations and ransomware attacks against critical American infrastructure, threatening our economic and national security. It is a critical strategic mistake for Donald Trump to unilaterally disarm against Putin." Again, this takes me back to Jeff Merkley and what Jeff Merkley had to say, just a couple of days ago. And Nate, cue up that video because I want you to. We played it in the first hour. This is something that every media in America should be playing. I sent this clip to Ali Velshi. In fact, I never, the last thing in the world that hosts want to get is story ideas from random people, but I just couldn't help myself. Here is my senator, United States Senator Jeff Merkley, questioning one of Donald Trump's nominees. He essentially repeated this with several of Trump's nominees. Here it is.
Is President Trump a Russian asset?
Absolutely not, Senator. He's the President of the United States, duly elected by the American people.
Well, the reason I ask is many people back home have been asking me this question. And they say, if he was an asset, we would see exactly what he's doing now. For example, he proceeded to forward or express from the Oval Office propaganda that has been Russian propaganda, that Ukraine started the war, that Zelensky is a dictator. Second of all, he gave away key things on the negotiating table before the negotiations even started, ensuring U.S. would absolutely oppose any possibility of NATO membership for Ukraine. Third, he's cut off the arms shipments to Ukraine, completely undermining their ability against a massive neighbor next door with short supply lines and huge resources. Fourth, he's undermined the partnership with Europe, which has been essential to security over the last 80 years, a major goal of Putin's. And then he's done everything to discredit and dismean Zelensky on the international stage with the just shameful press conference in which he teamed up with the vice president to attack Zelensky. I can't imagine that if he was a Russian asset, he could do anything more favorable than these 5 points. What else could a Russian asset actually possibly do that Trump hasn't yet done?
And the Trump guy at that point goes, well, you know, Donald Trump is a real patriot. Yeah, Jeff Merkley, Senator Merkley, and, you know, if you live in Oregon, call his office, 202-224-3121, ask for Jeff Merkley, and thank him and encourage him to keep doing this. So how could an American conflict with Russia play out? I think this is an important question. Nicole Perlroth, who has been a guest on this program, wrote a book titled, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, The Cyber Weapons Arm Race. And she writes from 2012 to 2014, and I'm just going to quote from her book, quote, Russian hackers made their way inside more than 1,000 companies in more than 84 countries, the vast majority of them here in the United States. She goes on to say that they made their way into hundreds of industrial control systems across the United States. You know, by infiltrating our systems with worms and viruses and direct attacks. Again, a quote, it wasn't just U.S. oil and gas companies anymore. Russian hackers infected the software updates that reached the industrial controllers inside hydroelectric dams, nuclear power plants, pipelines, and the national power grid, and were now inside the very computers that could unleash the locks at the dams, trigger an explosion, or shut down power to the grid. This action, she writes, was not Chinese-style industrial espionage. Moscow was preparing the battlefield. She quotes a cybersecurity expert, a guy by the name of John Hultquist, who told her, quote, this is the first stage in long-term preparation for an attack against the United States. There is no other plausible explanation. So if a war with Russia and the United States starts, it's not going to start with a nuclear bomb hitting New York. It's going to start with major dams opening and flooding downriver communities and killing thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans. It's going to start with a half a dozen nuclear power plants around America or more melting down. It's going to start with entire states browning out as their power grids are shut down. It's going to start with attacks on our financial system where all our banks are shut down. No power, no communications, no water. With those things happening, American cities would become unlivable within a week. They would become absolute hellscapes. Now, people say, hey, come on, Tom, that's crazy. No country could do that. Russia would never do that. That's not going to happen. Well, let me tell you what happened on Christmas Eve 2015. Barack Obama and his staff, Hillary Clinton and a bunch of the military folks were in the Situation Room, and this was what they were watching. And this is from an article by Kim Zetter in Wired. And this was punishment to Ukraine. This was right after they expelled Viktor Yanukovych and elected a pro-Western president. Ukraine did, right? Quote, all he could do was stare helplessly. This is about a supervisor at Ukraine's main power station. All he could do was stare helplessly at his screen while the ghosts in the machine clicked open one breaker after another, eventually taking about 30 substations offline. The attackers didn't stop there, though. They also struck 2 other power distribution centers at the same time, nearly doubling the number of substations taking offline and leaving more than 230,000 Ukrainians in the dark. And as if that weren't enough, they also disabled backup power supplies to 2 of the 3 distribution centers, leaving operators themselves stumbling around in the dark. Now, it gets even worse. This is, again, Andy Greenberg writing for Wired. On a national scale, NotPetya is the name of this virus, was eating Ukraine's computers alive. It would hit at least 4 hospitals in Kyiv alone, 6 power companies, 2 airports, more than 22 Ukrainian banks, ATMs and card payment systems in retailers and transport, and practically every federal agency. The government was dead, summarizes Ukrainian Minister of Infrastructure Volodymyr Omalyan. End of quote. About 10% of all the computers in Ukraine, corporate, government, and personal, 10% of all the computers in Ukraine were bricked, permanently destroyed. More than 300 companies were shut down and lost everything. Checkout systems in stores died. Gas stations couldn't process payments, so their pumps stopped working. Banks went down, and not only people were unable to access their balances, but a lot of banking information and all the money was simply lost forever. The Russian cyber weapon even took down the monitoring systems at Chernobyl, provoking panic among the scientists working remotely. The response of the Trump administration, this is when Donald Trump was president, this was in 2018. The response of the Trump administration took 2 months and was decisive. In early 2018, presumably following one of Trump's secret phone conversations with Putin, Donald Trump shut down President Obama's White House Office of the Cybersecurity Coordinator and ended the job of its then director, Rob Joyce. Shut it down. Ended the U.S. cybersecurity operations that could have blocked Russia from doing the same thing to us that they did to Ukraine. Trump shut it down in 2018. When Biden came into office, he discovered that the Russians had been inside U.S. government computers for almost the entire last year of Trump's administration. But it wasn't the government that discovered this. It was FireEye, a private corporation, which notified the government because Trump had shut down the government operations that could have told us about this. So last week, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Defense Secretary Hegseth shut down our operations that are designed to prevent Russia's intrusions into America's cyber infrastructure. And presumably Pam Bondi is doing the same thing over at the FBI, over at the Department of Homeland Security, or Kristi Noem, because she shut down the FBI's efforts to uncover and defeat Russian social media and fake news influence operations. That program was shut down by Pam Bondi. Think it can't happen here? It already has on a very small scale. This was not Russia, this was Iran. Iran came after us, and you got to hear this story of what they did to the United States and what they almost did to this state where I live in Oregon. What they almost did to us. They almost killed thousands of people. It was just a blunder that prevented a disaster. I'll tell you about that after the break. This is how the next war will probably be fought.